The 10th game of the 1966 World Championship match, which took place in Moscow between Tigran Petrosian and Boris Spassky, ended with a move that must have made Spassky fall out of his chair. It was this position, after 30 moves, arose on the board, and it's white to play. You are invited to pause the video and try to solve. Okay, we can see that white is down the exchange. The rook, however, is under attack on f7. White has an extra pawn besides that. But if white takes this rook, black will take most likely black could take the knight on e3. And with the white king wide open, it's not easy to win at all. However, that was not to be, as white had prepared earlier a stunning move, which caused black to have to resign immediately. And that move was to attract the black king into and deflect the king from the knight capture on f7, forking the king and queen. Queen to h8. Almost the longest possible move. The queen would have gone from a1, it would have been. And black had to resign because after king takes h8, knight takes f7, white now regains an entire rook and captures the black queen next after any move. And with an extra knight in a simple position, there's no point in playing on. For this course, I'm mostly going to be sticking with positions from actual games, but I will include a few compositions or studies or etudes as they're known, positions that were created to illustrate some kind of beautiful idea or concept. I've always liked studies and spent a lot of time looking at them or solving them, and I think that they can be real beneficial for your chess as well, besides the entertainment that they provide. So this is a very instructive position which shows a lot of a whole series of tactics. It's a composition by composers Horowitz and Kling. Not sure what year it is. You can solve for white to play. It's difficult but not impossible to solve. Okay, so if we look at this position, we see that first of all white has a rook, a knight, and pawn against the black queen. So technically material equality, but white's pieces are far flung in different parts of the board. The knight, in fact, is trapped on d8 and would be lost if black has a chance to take it. The knight will not be able to get away. Furthermore, black has a number of checks. If he can get the initiative, he may have some chances to fork white, and certainly would not lose if white doesn't have some kind of forcing path. But once again, we see signposts that there is a combination imminent. The presence of the knight near the black king and queen is always of concern. The knight can fork, and it's a very tricky piece, as we know, so that shows signs that there may be something hidden here. White has a number of forcing moves possible as well. And the move that definitely should jump out is rook a4. The knight, of course, couldn't do anything. It would be captured anywhere it went, but the rook immediately disturbs black and tries to force the king into a bad position. In fact, it forces the king onto the same rank as the queen. So black plays king e5. This is the best defense. King c5. The alternative, of course, loses right away after rook a5 check. A skewer, which wins the queen, leaving white up a knight and a pawn. Very easy path to victory then. So king e5. And for a moment, you might think white's at an impasse here. The checks by the pawns don't do anything. Black simply moves the king to safety. For instance, f4, king f5 is fine. The knight checks, of course, allow the knight to be captured. But then we notice, well, king and queen are on the same rank, so we have some ideas to make a pin, and supported by the knight fork, we might, if we're lucky, see the move rook a5. Very typical deflecting sacrifice, or actually in this case you might call it an attracting sacrifice, because it brings the queen to a5 if she captures, which then allows the fork. The queen is lost, and again white's up a knight and pawn and wins easily. But not all is hopeless for black yet, because black, despite the pinned queen and the fact that he can't take the rook, black has the move c5, interposing the pawn, seemingly securing his position. And if white has, again, nothing forcing here, White can only be losing, or at least worse, struggling to hold the game. But white has yet another forcing move, and this is the real toughest point. But we look for forcing moves, we look for forks that the knight and also perhaps pawns can create, and so we find the move rook takes c5. This is where it takes a jump of imagination. The queen is pinned, so there's clearly no choice but to take the rook, and then the follow-up, since the knight has no checks, the follow-up is d4, forking the king and queen by the pawn. Of course, that pawn can be captured either way. It has to be captured, otherwise, again, white's up a knight and a pawn. But either way it's captured, it results in a fork. So if king takes d4, knight e6 check wins the queen and leaves white with the extra pawn, or slightly better defense, trying to end up with his king closer to blocking white's pawn, is queen takes d4, and then there's knight c6. Either way, the king has to move, we take the queen. White ends up with, after that whole combination, with one extra pawn. And if you know king and pawn endings, this can sometimes be a draw, but not in this case, because white's able to get his king far enough forward to clear the way for the pawn to advance. So the key move, the only move to win, is king f3. The king must come first. Of course, king and pawn endings are not subject to this course, but, well, still need to see this. Black hurries back to try to stop the pawn in the only way he can, and then again white has to clear some space again to control the space in front of the pawn. King g4. The king comes back, and white takes the opposition with king f4, forcing the black king to step aside, and then white can take further space, and I'm not going to cover the rest, but white wins with king and pawn against king in this position, because white has the opposition and the pawn is still far enough back.
Fine combination took place in the game Johannes Zukertort against Bertold Englisch from a tournament, London 1883, which is one of the earliest chess tournaments that was held. So you can now pause the video and solve for white to play. Okay, so if we come to the position, we see material is equal, and white has, first thing that jumps out at us is this passed pawn on c7, which is one step away from queening. Such a pawn always has the possibility of giving rise to combinational motifs, tactics, and so on. So it would be quite reasonable here to start looking for a forced win. This is a very concrete position. Black is getting ready also to take the passed pawn, so we have to do something. It's a critical position. So we start looking for forcing moves, and the first thing we might see, of course, queen to b8 check. This is a very obvious move, checking the black king, protecting the pawn on c7, and also covering c8, so white is ready to queen the pawn next. However, we look further and we see that black's reply king to d7 gets him out of check and also covers c8 a second time, thus preventing the pawn from queening. Black also adds an attacker to c7 by bringing the king up, so the pawn is once again threatened. Furthermore, if white's queen goes away somewhere, for instance, queen takes a7, then black can play queen takes d5, because white's no longer threatening to queen the pawn. And after other moves, well, queen to d8 is not possible because the knight covers that square. And after other moves by the white queen, black can take on c7. Black's threatening to take the pawn. So we would have to reluctantly abandon queen to b8 and see what else we have here. Still the sense remains that white should have some kind of forcing continuation. Black's position is so fragile. c8 square is covered by the black queen. If she could be deflected from covering c8, then white could queen the pawn. Well, how can we do this? We also notice that the black king and queen are on the same diagonal, which is a further factor which can give rise to tactical motifs. So we notice that we have ways we can deflect the black queen based on the fact that the queen will be pinned. Queen to b5 or queen to a4. So, however, we wonder, well, if we give up our queen just to queen the pawn, well, how do we come out ahead on this? This is a point where many players would fail. and give up on the idea of deflecting the black queen. But it's good to have a general sense, and to carry your thoughts further and use your fantasy to try to find something that works. So here, Zukertort didn't give up on the idea. He found the move queen to b5. Now, clearly black has to take the white queen. Of course, king to d7 would allow white to trade queens and then queen the pawn. Or it's also possible to queen immediately and deflect the black king and then take the queen. So black clearly has to take white's queen. Queen takes b5, and now we queen the pawn. And black is in check, has to play king to f7. The only other legal move, knight to d8, allows this fork, knight to c7. The other tactical motif that we see is that white's knight is near the black king and queen, which, as is often the case, gives rise to forking combinations. So black plays king to f7, and perhaps for a moment we are stuck. We've given up our queen to get a new queen, but this has only lost us our passed pawn. But if we persist, we see that we still have these forking possibilities with the knight. So we need to have seen in advance the following nice move. Queen takes e6 check, which removes the defender of c7 and attracts the black king to the square where he will be forked. So the only move, of course, if black moves the king somewhere else, white remains with the extra knight and wins easily. So the only move left is to take the queen, in which case white then plays knight to c7, winning the queen back and remaining with an extra knight. Black played king e5, knight takes b5, so white's up a knight. Now actually the resulting position isn't trivial, because white's extra knight has difficulty dealing with the rook pawn on this side of the board. If black could somehow divert white's pieces to deal with the a pawn, then he could somehow attack white's pawns on the king side and try to remove all the pawns. However, in the end white won, and in fact the position is winning. So we won't go further into that. The extra knight will have to suffice for us.